The late 2000s and early 2010s were a time during which interest in the survival horror genre was heavily fading out. Game publishing companies were frantically scrambling to replicate the success of their contemporaries, which, during this period, was the increasingly popular high-octane action shooter genre. Games like Call of Duty had exploded in popularity during this era. The shockwaves of that explosion are still being felt to this very day. Trend chasing is something that has been prevalent in the games industry ever since the medium's conception. So, while players were increasingly craving their fix of the fast-action virtual stimulation, it should come as no surprise that elements of the high-octane action shooters of the time began to quickly bleed their way into other genres and subgenres, with the niche survival horror genre being no exception. Capcom's Resident Evil series held the top spot for most survival horror enthusiasts ever since the first game in the franchise released in 1986 for the Sony PlayStation. The years preceding that game's incarnation had seen its formula slowly but surely diluted from the slow, methodical, and unsettling gameplay mechanics and leaned ever more heavily towards that of the action shooter genre. Many would credit this shift in tone to the release of 2005's Resident Evil 4, which at the time was a massive departure from what made the original game so popular. Yet the overwhelming success of the fourth mainline entry, both critically and commercially, was impossible to ignore. So, unsurprisingly, developers of the next entries to the series would double down on the more action-centric elements that made RE4 so popular. This trend continued not only with Capcom's survival horror series, but with other development teams creating their art within the once exceedingly popular subgenre. Survival horror had not completely died out, but it was becoming increasingly difficult to differentiate games of the genre from their Call of Duty-esque counterparts, at least to the untrained eye. Rather than being presented with this, gamers were being presented with this. During the late 2000s and early 2010s, many of Resident Evil's offspring titles released, despite looking and at times feeling like they had nothing in common with the series that they owed much of their influence. So, let's take a look at one game that is Resident Evil disguised as Call of Duty with Metro 2033. Metro 2033 is undeniably a survival horror game. Recognizable gameplay tropes and a heavy emphasis on atmosphere as you tensely navigate a helpless main character along an intriguing journey is exactly what makes a subgenre appealing yet terrifying. Based on a Russian novel by Dmitry Glukhovsky, the tale of Metro 2033 takes place in the depths of a post-apocalyptic Moscow. The extensive underground metro system has become home to the city's natives, following a nuclear devastation that has wreaked havoc on the world above. Tattered towns and squalid stations sprawl throughout the metro system, providing sanction from the vicious mutations, dangerous anomalies, and supernatural entities that now reside the once habitable environments of Moscow's surface. The grim and unique backdrop of the narrative, along with the appropriately negative portrayal of mankind, serves as the game's true main character. However, the player character whose intriguing tale we are thrust into participating in makes for one hell of an immersive and simply terrifying experience. Navigating the metro's murky depths in control of a young Artyom is drenched in horrific atmosphere, enticing the player to confront each obstacle in a slow, methodical manner, scavenging along the way for supplies, ammo, and weapons, which are typically scarce and instill a genuine sense of achievement upon discovery. Particularly on the rare occasions that you might stumble across a highly upgraded weapon that may just swing the odds in your favour during one of the early game's intense and at times frustrating combat encounters. The game's title screen immediately reveals what awaits us, an industrial metro to which humanity has retreated, lending a certain warmth and comfort to the lives of the people who live there. Once we've selected our difficulty settings, we're thrown in head first as our team faces the prologue, which gives us some details about what's happening as he ventures to the surface, hoping to do something that can help humanity survive what threatens it. As you navigate the tunnels, Miller guides you through a relatively natural tutorial without getting too involved to hold your hand. The atmosphere is immediately profound. Everything barely holds in the pieces that crumble around it as the electronics struggle to function. It's an industrial tour de force made by humans. The game still looks great, and there's an amazing attention to detail as everything feels unique and crumbles in its own way, matching the object at hand as you come to the surface. 20 years after the bombing of Moscow evoking the apocalypse, you see ruins. Our team puts on his gas mask, and soon you emerge in a hall that is quickly infested with mutants. In the time it takes to learn how to use your weapon, being forced to defend yourself, you quickly learn how to liberate every action, as the sight doesn't act like a zoom, but more like a fixed crosshair for more precision, with slow transitions that require you to follow each pull of the left trigger to be truly effective, meaning you have to rely on the rhythm and timing of each weapon to get a feel for when you're running out of ammo. The overlay of the gas mask is brilliant. The creeping frost and the vignette of the water droplets make you feel cut off from the world. There's always a layer between you and the surface, so interacting with it feels obstructed and authentic. The sound of our team's breathing is constant, but it doesn't sound like he's breathing. It sounds more like he's sucking in air. This illustrates the feeling of using a snorkel or something when you're breathing. The tensity and strategic nature of the game's combat mechanics, mixed with the incredible ambience, world building, and attention to detail, go a very long way towards helping this title feel very much more Resident Evil and less Call of Duty. Although our adventure takes place in a somewhat realistic, albeit horrific, alternate reality, the narrative does develop to further emphasize its more supernatural elements. These aspects of the game's story are rife with symbolism and chilling metaphorical forewarning of what we as the species are more than capable of subjecting our civilization to. Metro 2023's Big Bad, the mysterious Dark Ones, are the driving force of the mission at hand. Defeating these entities becomes the ultimate endgame. I'm conscious of avoiding spoilers here, so let's just say there is a massive twist at the end that leaves the player seeing these creatures in a very different light, and even regretting many of the actions in which they'd participated through the game's runtime. The exact origins of the Dark Ones is unknown throughout the Metro franchise, with theories ranging from them being humans who somehow adapted to the radiation on the surface, or they're the result of experiments from before the nuclear attack. The Dark Ones are basically an allegory for xenophobia in the world of Metro 2033. And where their intentions may be somewhat mysterious, it is clear by the game's conclusion that they wish to coexist with humanity. A stark contrast to many of the other mutated enemies which appear throughout the game, which seemingly want nothing more than the complete annihilation of mankind. Perhaps an underlying frustration of the destruction inflicted upon the world by humans preceding the events of Metro 2033's narrative. Metro 2033 does not hold the player's hand. Although a linear experience with progressing through missions often requiring simply moving forward, the many challenging combat encounters break up the simplicity of the level traversal, forcing players to take their time and search every crevice of their environment for any piece of equipment or healing item to help them survive the inevitable white-knuckle-inducing encounters. Item management plays a huge role in restricting the amount of salvage weapons our team can carry, with 3 being the limit adding further strategy as the player contemplates which weapons to hold on to and which to swap out for an upgraded piece of equipment. Weapons can be upgraded between missions in exchange for currency in the form of ammunition. An extra layer of resource management is introduced when upgrading weapons are found during missions, removing the need to diminish our team's stash of in-world currency. This type of deep resource management has been a staple of the survival horror genre since its inception. Another genre-defining trope, which is present in vast amounts, is how Metro 2033 deals with its world building. Games like Resident Evil or Silent Hill unravel pieces of their narratives through collectible notes, diary entries, newspaper articles, and incredible forms of environmental storytelling, such as coming across corpses or blood-splattered walls, informing the player of the dangers lurking beyond. Metro 2033 may do this better than any game I've played before it. Each makeshift town or station is littered with collectible pieces of literature, further expanding the game's lore. Not to mention the many occasions in which we stumble upon 2 or more NPCs mid-conversation, depicting the horrors of the reality in which they exist. Metro 2033 is a living, breathing dystopia that never ceased to capture both my imagination and attention. And, given that this is an incredibly linear experience, that's no easy feat. If you've yet to experience the horrifying and immersive world of Metro 2033, then I urge you to go do so. Just be very much aware of the fact that this is a game that should be experienced at a much slower pace than the more typical titles that share much of the same aesthetics. There's a lot to love about exploring the depths of a post-apocalyptic Moscow, as long as you're able to keep in mind that this game is much more Resident Evil than Call of Duty.